Welcome back to Parenting in the Trenches. We're going to continue talking about all things baby related and that new phase of parenting. And today, my guest is going to help us talk about sleep, infant sleep, and our own self care and sleep as new parents. My guest today is Johanna Snyder, a sleep consultant and owner of Sleep Soundly Consulting. When Johanna was ready to shift some gears professionally from her previous career as a teacher, she considered her own experience as a mom. Her eldest son's sleep challenges had come to mind. He barely slept for the first 3 months of his life, which really led her to read every kind of current book and article on sleep that was available to her. And she found herself asking questions like, why can't he fall asleep on his own? Why does he wake up after such a short nap? And how do I help him sleep through the night? Influenced by learning how to create healthy sleep habits for her own kids, Johanna has successfully helped countless friends and colleagues work through their own children's sleep struggles. She realized that she really loved enabling other families to discover healthy sleep. Johanna decided that this was going to be her new professional challenge and something that she had been longing for and looking for. She was inspired and ready to instill confidence in others regarding their kids' sleep. Johanna earned her certification as a child sleep consultant through the Family Sleep Institute. This program gave her the opportunity to connect with and learn from the industry's top sleep experts. The FSI program provides the most comprehensive evidence-based child sleep education. Johanna is also a member of the International Association of Child Sleep Consultants and has additional certifications in reducing the risk of SIDS in childcare and lactation management. Johanna combines both her personal and professional experience to enable and support her clients. She works with families through in-person, virtual, or phone consultations, elicits their own goals, and provides a personalized sleep plan to meet each family's needs. She takes time to coach and support her families through their work together. Johanna has an MA, a master's degree, in curriculum and teaching in elementary education. And before she was a sleep consultant, she taught first and fourth grade and was a third grade learning specialist in New York City. Johanna, her husband, and their two boys now reside in Westchester, New York, near Long Island Sound. Welcome. Okay, Johanna, I'm so appreciative of your time, especially on this weekend that you're taking out of family time to help us understand sleep transitions. And I really wanted to tackle two angles on this today. I would love to talk about what transitions in sleep mean for the infant. So, what is actually happening in their development that causes these what seems like really frequent transitions, right? We just have it down and then something changes again every 2 months. We're in a new rhythm. But I also wanted to talk about what it means for us as new parents and what sleep, how important it is for us and how we go about navigating that in the midst of really caring for a primary need now, right? In somebody else. So I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for
Thank
doing this.
you. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited. I love being part of this, especially this particular series. I just think that any resources that can help new and expecting or seasoned parents, really any resources that are out there to help is so important, especially, we talk about the fourth trimester or those first few months of life
Mhm.
where everything feels very new.
Oh
So I'm
my
excited to
goodness.
be
Yeah.
here and talk about sleep. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay. So I have to say, like, before I had kids, I was confident in some areas of parenting before I had kids because I've been exposed to a lot of kids for a long time. So I didn't worry about certain things around infancy and caring for an infant. It was probably a little cocky. There was a little bit of that in there. Like I thought I figured it out because I know this stuff. I've read these books. And then there's this category of like, I have no idea how I'm going to survive this. And I was most terrified of sleep. I loved my sleep routine. Like I thrived when I had my 9 hours of sleep every night. And I'm not that person. I'm not going to just be able to get up every 2 to 3 hours or like I knew I could never be a nurse. I could never do night shifts. It was just not my thing. And I was terrified of that piece. We lucked out with number one. Our first child was a dream in the sleep department. And so it fooled me into thinking, oh, this isn't actually that bad. And then my second jolted us out of that fantasy into reality because she had a sleep disorder with night terrors. We never got consecutive sleep past an hour and a half ever on any night for 4 years straight. And I still worked and I still had a toddler. And you swear that's going to kill you. You think there's no possible way you will get through. And it's amazing what you rise to. So there's a little bit of nugget of hope there that, like, I've survived this, you can too. But my goodness, you don't know what's coming. Like, it's so variable. I just wonder in your work, because it's so tailored to this aspect, what comes across your desk and across your screen? Who are you talking to? How priority based is this sleep thing in those first few months?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And a lot of what you said was sort of resonating with me as
Yeah.
well. You obviously really, you know, a sleep disorder like night terrors is a whole different area that really, you're making sure your child's safe. You kind of have to let it play out, and there's not a ton you can do. And so that's exhausting. And what you can accomplish during the day when you don't get sleep at night really sometimes is shocking to all of us. It's not that we should be
Yeah.
doing that.
No, I
All of
know.
us need the sleep, right?
Uh,
We all need sleep for mental well-being, for physical well-being,
yeah.
for, postpartum, particularly in that fourth trimester.
Yeah.
If you're a parent that birthed a baby, you're healing, like all these pieces
Yep.
that you need sleep for, and it's very different than what sleep was like prior to having children.
Mm,
And that beginning, those first few months, sleep can be so different. Like even you said, two different children. So for new parents, I think this is a whole new world. But even for parents who have had a child, they're now
mhm.
having a different human being in their home, and that is a
Yep.
different baby who has different needs and different sleep. So in those first few months, it's miraculous what we can do with the lack of sleep, but it's not
Mhm.
good for any of our
No.
bodies. I tell families all the time, if you can get support, if you and your partner can take turns, if there is a partner, if you have family, great. We don't live near family, so that,
Yeah.
wasn't as an option for us, but a friend,
Mm,
anyone who can help so that you can get some amount of rest is really important because that new trimester, it's like you're feeding a new person. Are you feeding them enough? We worry. Did the baby eat enough? Is the baby sucking? Is the baby latching? Is the baby digesting? Is the baby? There's so many new and worries
mm.
that we're focusing on, and yet focus is really hard when you're exhausted,
Yeah.
and it's hard to learn new things when you're exhausted, and it's hard to have patience when you're exhausted,
Mhm.
and yet you need all those things when you have a new baby, right? You have to
Yeah.
kind of be patient, and it's a big learning curve. So I think sleep is like you said, it was like a huge adjustment, or lack of sleep is a huge adjustment for anyone with a new baby because
Mm,
their sleep rhythms are different than ours.
yeah.
Biologically, they're just not developed yet, and so they do have daytime nighttime confusion. They do have short
Mhm.
intervals of sleep, and that's a big disruption in our lives. So
Yeah.
I work with families with children 0 to 10, so I see like a whole all different types of sleep
Okay.
and sleep issues. But in those first few months, we talk a lot about taking one day at a time,
Mhm.
helping your baby get a lot of sleep, a lot of safe sleep, and I can talk about that in a little bit. But I think that the change in sleep for us as adults when we have a new child in our home
Mm,
is up at the top of the list of like, "Ooh, this was
okay.
a big life-changing situation," because
Yeah.
when we don't sleep, everything is harder. Like it's just harder
So
to really,
foundational, right?
yeah,
Everything stems
yeah,
from that, our
everything stems
capacity.
from it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and emotional well-being, whatever, your focus, everything is much harder. And
Mm,
so I try to encourage families to rest when their baby's resting, if that's possible, to get help if that's
mhm.
possible, and also just to kind of like give yourself a break in terms of, um, you know, you might not get to the laundry
Mm.
tomorrow, you might not get to making a
Yeah, what
meal,
else
but
has to
that's
give, and
okay,
that's
right?
okay.
Yep,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Man, we have high bars, don't we?
yeah,
Like, we go
very.
in thinking we're just adding a little immobile
Yeah.
being to
Yes.
our
Yeah.
lives. It's
Yeah.
just gonna lay there and it'll do what we say.
Yeah, and
So
it's
not that.
it's hard too because when I work with families, sometimes they'll say like, "I didn't wanna change my life around for this,"
Uh-huh. There's
and
resistance to that.
but if and this is sort of after the first 4 months when you really do wanna develop some sort of schedule and routine for sleeping, and
Yep.
it does mean that you're kind of tied to being home or in a place where your baby can sleep
Mhm.
at certain hours, and so it does mean adjusting life, but if you do that, if you're allowing your baby to sleep at those times, the benefit of it is so great for everyone that the long
Mm.
term is yes, you want to be home for nap time so your child can sleep. I know it feels like you're not getting to do what you used to do, but
Yeah.
when you respect sleep needs of your child, there's so many benefits to it for everybody.
I think aren't we just scared that they'll never change?
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
I think that's part of the recipe for me. I was like,
Yeah.
I don't wanna give in because if it
Yep.
means that's the destiny of my life for the next
Right.
20
Right.
years, no
Right.
thank you. It's
Right.
hard when you have an infant to see past this phase, and yet
It
they're
is.
rapid. Those
Yes.
changes happen
Yes.
fast.
Yeah, they do. I mean, the first 4 months and really in those first few weeks even
Yep.
0 to 6 weeks is different from 8 to 12 weeks, and from the beginning, my focus with families a lot is safe sleep no matter what. So I follow
Yeah.
the American Academy of Pediatrics recommendations and my certification program, which was the Family Sleep Institute, and we follow the ABCs of sleep. So if I say to families in those first 4 months, things are gonna change a lot. So you want
Mm.
to be flexible and you want to be
Mhm.
patient, but things that you can sort of have control over,
Yep.
making sure the environment is really safe. So baby's sleeping alone, and you can room share. It's just a matter of in their
Yeah.
own
Yeah.
bassinet or crib or pack and play. Baby's sleeping on their backs, so
Mm.
putting them down on their backs every single time, and in a crib or bassinet or pack and play that has no added bumpers, no
Mhm.
even mesh ones, no mobiles, nothing else in there, just empty is the best. So in those first few weeks when things are going to change a lot, you can kind of hone in on, okay, let's make sure the environment is super safe. Let's provide a dark room. Using white noise is great. It helps kind of
Mm.
mimic the womb, and if it's a constant shushing sound, it allows our brain to kind of get into a resting space.
Yeah.
So if you want some control, because it feels like there's not very much that you can control, those are some things to start with. And then
Yeah.
there's going to be changes. Like in those first few weeks, it's probably short intervals of sleep. So you might get 30 minutes of it at a time.
Okay.
Some babies sleep 4 hours at a time. It really is,
Yeah.
dependent, but you wanna focus on really short wake windows in those first 4 months. So even if your baby's sleeping 30 minutes or 2 hours, their
Mhm.
time that they're awake should be pretty short, maybe 30 to 45 minutes, and then they're gonna be tired again and
Okay.
ready for sleep. So, focusing on safe sleep and focusing on helping your child get to sleep so they sleep a lot. It might be shorter intervals, and that's the whole part of like we're up a lot at
Yeah.
night because they might sleep an hour
Yep.
and then be up to eat and then an
Frequent
hour and be up to
turnover.
eat. So there's a lot of
Mhm.
frequent turnover, but there's still a lot of chunks of sleep.
Yeah.
Um, so short wake windows and really helping your baby to get to sleep. At
Mm.
from 0 to 6 or 8 weeks, there is daytime nighttime confusion. That
Yeah.
is
Okay,
what
that's normal.
they're
Yeah.
biologically not developed enough to have be able to know the difference between day and night, and so
Mm.
you should expect a very sleepy daytime baby and a baby that
Mm.
at night might be up more. And it's, again, like we said at the beginning, frustrating for us since we're like,
Yeah.
it's 10 o'clock, I should be
Yeah.
sleeping now, it's bedtime, and that's not necessarily your baby's biologically not ready for that yet.
Mm.
So that's okay. I always push people to know that keeping your baby up during the day is not going to help them sleep better at night
Mm.
during that window of time. It's just going to make them more tired, leading
Irritable.
to
Yeah.
overtired, leading to harder to
Mm.
fall back to sleep.
Okay.
So during those first few weeks of life, they're biologically not ready for daytime, nighttime to settle in. So just
Okay.
helping them get a lot of sleep during the day and a lot of sleep at
Mm.
night, even if it's short windows of time. Um, and then at around 6 to 8 weeks, there actually is this change happening, and they are more biologically developed to understand and have longer stretches at night. So a lot
Okay.
of families will start to see maybe not all families, every baby's a little different, but 4 hours a stretch at night, or even a 3 hour stretch at night, sometimes more than that, because between that 6 and 8 week window, you really will start to see their brain development. They're starting to move towards being able to sleep longer. It's still
Okay.
very common to wake every 3 hours to eat. It's still common to eat a lot overnight, but you're gonna see longer stretches, hopefully.
Okay.
And that daytime sleep will be shorter and maybe a more awake baby, but still, I mean, no more than an hour awake, really.
Mhm.
Um, I'm a very scheduled person, so I like thought I was gonna have a schedule right away with my
Yep.
babies and didn't quite realize that they're not gonna eat at the same time every day just yet. They're not gonna sleep at the same time every
Mhm.
day just yet. Like they're not old enough for a schedule yet, but what you can do, and this was helpful for me, is a routine.
Yeah. It's
So
finding
they're
a
gonna
rhythm.
Yep, so they're gonna
Yeah.
eat and then maybe up for a little bit and then sleep. And then they're gonna
Right.
eat and then maybe up for a little bit and then sleep. And if you can kind of
Yeah.
get that routine in, and it's not
Okay.
gonna be the same every day, but at least you can kind of follow that routine. That was helpful for me
Mm.
as someone who was like, I like this is so
How do I
it
work
felt
with
very
this?
out of control. Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
and so, yeah, I think in those first few weeks of
Mm.
life, it's a lot of safe sleep. It's helping your
Mm.
baby. I wouldn't expect to have a baby that you just put down and falls asleep independently. You're going to have to
Mhm.
try out some soothing mechanisms, whether
Mhm.
it's rocking your baby or shushing your baby, or for some people, walking or bouncing on a yoga ball. You're going to kind of experiment in that time to figure out what works for you and what works for your child.
Mm.
Try some different mechanisms and different soothing areas to see what's going to work for my baby. When they've been up for 30 minutes, you're going to start to maybe notice some sleepy signs. Maybe their eyebrows are red. Maybe they're like kind of zoning or staring off into space. Maybe they're fussy or crying. You're gonna start to pick up on your baby's sleepy cues
Mhm.
and kind of jump on it before they get overtired. So then start those soothing mechanisms, moving into their dark room,
Yeah.
swaddling them and putting them down before they get overtired. Um, and then
Well, and
when they
isn't
get,
that the
yeah,
fundamental difference of who's in the lead there, right? So if we
yes,
say
yeah,
you, baby, are going to
right,
join me in my routine and
right,
my
right,
rhythm and my timing and my schedule,
right, right,
then we get so frustrated with not just the
yes,
baby, but ourselves. Why can't I make them fall asleep? I'm doing all the right things. But in the
yeah,
meantime, biologically, they're not connecting with your soothing mechanism
right.
because we're 2 hours late,
Right. Well, and
right?
that's such a good point. I tell families,
Yeah.
no matter how old their child is, we can't force a child to sleep.
No.
We as
Yeah.
parents can provide a conducive sleep environment,
Hmm.
and we can help them with the tools they need to learn to self-soothe. And when they're babies, we can help rock them and soothe them when they're very young. But we can't force. So we have to
Yeah.
kind of take their lead sometimes, especially in those beginning weeks where we're really looking for, she's been up for 30 minutes already. We're going to move towards like,
Mhm.
she's going to start to get cranky soon, and we're going to have to move towards, even if it means putting her in some sort of a carrier and wearing her and helping her sleep that way. You're
Yep.
not creating bad habits in those first
Yeah.
few weeks and months. You really aren't. As long as it's safe, you're
Mhm.
not. You're helping your baby get the best sleep. And so as you go, maybe you're in 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks now, you're starting to figure out really what soothing mechanisms work for my child. And then
Yep.
you can start to be consistent with them. So you've tried
Yeah.
out a few different ones, but now you realize that, rocking is what works for your baby. So be
Yep.
consistent with that. You have a consistent environment now. You have a consistent routine where maybe you change a diaper and then you swaddle and then you rock, and
Yep.
you kind of have those consistent routines at the beginning. And again, it's all about routine. It's not necessarily
Mm.
schedule quite yet.
Yeah.
um, but by 16 weeks, there actually is a big developmental change that
Mm.
happens, and a lot of parents will say, oh, there's a 4 month regression. I had a really
Mm.
sleepy baby, she was sleeping really well, and then at 4 months everything fell apart.
Yep.
And it's actually less of a regression and more developmental. So
Okay.
you might start to see social smiles. Your baby's much more aware of you and being in the room, and it's like, she's
Mm.
actually seeing you and smiling, not just like a
Yeah,
random
there's
smile, which is like
interaction.
amazing. Right.
Yep.
And that's showing developmental changes, which actually
Mm.
means sleep can change. And
Mm.
so rather than working on wake windows, that's when I adjust, because now biologically a baby's circadian rhythm has developed. And that's what we
Okay.
all have. That's our internal clock. it dictates our sleep cycles and our wake cycles. So as adults and as older people who have a circadian rhythm, light tells our brain it's time to be awake. So whether it's sunlight, overhead light, a phone, cell phone light, that's tricking your brain or telling your brain, oh, it's
Yeah.
awake time.
Daytime. Yeah.
And darkness tells our brain it's time to be asleep. And
Hmm.
we as adults get our best quality, most restorative sleep at night. So we get all the benefits from sleep when we sleep at night, for
Yeah.
physical and mental well-being. And babies starting at around 4 months, we can actually start to match their sleep to their circadian rhythm. So we looked at awake windows, like from 0 to 4 months, it was all about up for a short time, back to sleep, up for a short
Mm.
time, like looking at those wake windows. And then we're making this transition, to actually be closer to looking at the clock and saying, it's 9 a.m., it's time for a nap. It's
Yeah.
12 o'clock, it's time for a nap. And it doesn't happen overnight. When I work with families with babies this age, it's kind of between 4 and 5 months, we work on this. So some days
Okay.
that first nap really wasn't great. And so we're not going to make it to the next set time. It's going to have
Mhm.
to be a little bit earlier. But what we're aiming for is 3 naps a day. And
Mm.
that first nap happening around 8:30, 9 o'clock, depending on the waking of, if you have a really early riser. And
Yeah.
then we're hoping for about a 12 o'clock nap. And then that third nap is actually just a cat nap. So the
Mm.
first 2 naps of the day are the ones we want to be the restorative naps. One's a mentally
Yeah.
restorative nap, one's a physically restorative nap. And the
Mm.
cat nap is really just bridging the gap between naps ending and bedtime starting because it's just
Okay.
too long of a stretch to go. And so at this point, up until now, I've really said to families, if you need to rock your baby, if your baby's in a stroller, if they're moving and sleeping and you're trying to, get them to sleep in a safe way, that's great. Now there's this developmental change where their circadian rhythm is developed and we can start to match sleep to it so that they get the best quality sleep.
Mm.
And now we actually want to move into motionless sleep. And motion sleep is rocking and rocking a baby to sleep. And motionless sleep is if are put down in a crib or a bassinet, or if we lie down in bed and fall asleep without the motion.
Okay.
Motion puts our bodies to sleep, but it actually doesn't allow us to get into a deep restorative sleep.
Okay.
So you're, up until this point. So now we're having like a potentially learning curve for babies because up until now, maybe your baby can fall asleep independently. You've tried a little bit, or maybe you're helping still. But now is when you want to really start to help your baby learn to self soothe so that you can put
Mm.
them down awake in a non motion environment and then they can fall asleep independently. And that's when they fall into a deep sleep. And that's when they get really quality,
Mm.
restorative, healthy sleep. Um, it doesn't happen overnight though. So I also tell
Yeah.
families, you know, this is a process. Learning to self-soothe is like learning to crawl or learning to walk. It takes time and it
Mm.
takes patience and it takes practice. There's lots of ways you can help your child learn, but you want to give them some space to be independent and support them
Mm.
in it, so that they can really take those 2 naps in the beginning, that are non-motion. And then the third
Yeah.
nap, I tell families, if you have to go on a walk, if you want to go in the stroller, that's the one that if you're in a car and your baby falls asleep, because that's actually not the restorative nap. That's just like a
Right.
cat
Catch
nap,
up.
sometimes
Yeah.
catch up.
Right.
Yeah, if you had two not great naps in the middle, beginning of the day,
Yeah.
that's like where you're going to sleep. Um,
Huh.
and so that's around the 4 or 5 month mark, and that's why you hear people say 4 months and everything fell apart. Your baby's
Yeah.
actually developing and growing and ready for change, and ready for a transition. So,
Mm.
and they'll take those 3 naps until about 7 or 8 months, and then it becomes 2 naps, similar
Yes.
to the others, based on timing, looking at the
Yeah.
clock and saying, okay, it's 9 o'clock, it's time for a nap. So those first few weeks, it's safe sleep and short wake windows and one day at a time, sometimes 1 hour at a time, just to make sure your baby's getting a lot of sleep.
Yeah.
um, and trying soothing mechanisms, seeing what works for your baby and what works for you, what you feel
Mm.
comfortable with, until you have a consistency, and then you're trying to stick with some consistency so that you're giving the baby the message where I'm swaddling you and rocking you. That means it's going to be time to go to sleep. We're going into a dark room and I'm turning the white noise on. Oh, those are indicators that it's going to be time to go to sleep soon.
Hmm.
Um, so so those are some big transitions, but yeah, yeah.
They're huge. I was just imagining all the families that have shorter than desired maternity or parental leaves,
Yeah.
and where daycare is
Mhm.
setting the tone.
Yeah. Yes. So I
And
work
how
with
hard
lots
that
of
is to
families.
work with.
Yeah. Yeah. I work with a lot of families that children are in daycare,
Mm,
and we kind of do the best we can. A lot of daycares are wonderful, and they actually already
okay.
have really good times set up for
Mm,
naps. Or I will encourage a family to say, we're working on this. Are these the nap times, or what can we do to work around? Do you
yeah,
think 9 a.m.
advocate.
would be appropriate? Yep, really advocating for yourself
Mm,
and asking, because we would be surprised to know that daycares will then say, oh, okay, sure. I mean, we
mm,
can't change the whole classroom of children, but
yeah,
if it's between a 9 o'clock or a 10 o'clock nap and we ask for 9, they're going to hopefully say sure. A lot of daycares are already doing it. And then
mm,
sometimes, like what I run into sometimes with daycares, and it's fine, is that usually up until a year and past a year, you want a baby taking 2 naps a day.
okay.
I really encourage holding on to 2 naps until closer to 15 to 18 months. But
Yeah,
there are a lot of daycares that at 1 year, you switch into a older kid classroom and drop
yep,
1 nap. And so you're only napping once. And if that's the case, then we work with it. And encourage
mm,
families to offer 2 naps on the weekends, maybe to help them get 2 naps on those days, and just offer a super early bedtime. So there are ways
yeah.
to adjust, but yeah,
It's a tricky factor,
advocating.
right?
It's a
Yeah,
tricky factor, and advocating and asking, just speaking up and asking the daycare beforehand.
yeah,
Hey, this is what we're working on. Is this something that we can do, and
yeah.
you can help us with?
That's really good. There's so much in there I had no idea
Yeah.
about. And I was just recalling, I mean, my kids are 11 and 14, so it's my memory's a little bit shot, but just some of the
Some,
stuff you brought up, I'm like,
some.
"Oh, I did not know that. No wonder that was such a tricky spot for us." Like,
It's
and I
hard
even thought
because,
about the difference between me and my partner in soothing. So the way our kids received soothing was different. And even
of
if it
course,
felt like it was we were doing the same thing, like we were both rocking, the
right?
feel of that was unique. And
Yes, yes.
one of our kids is just so sensory
Hmm.
specific, just could pick up on subtle differences and would
Hmm.
not have it from one, but loved
Yep.
it from the other. Right. And
Yeah.
just that
Yep.
did it's so much changes our dynamics. And yeah,
Yes, and children from birth can read our energy for
yeah,
sure, and
yeah.
so I as hard as it when I work with families, they're really struggling with sleep. So when they come to me,
Mm,
they feel like they are at rock bottom, or they feel like they
yes.
really are like not sure what to do. And it's
Mm,
hard to be positive about sleep when they're coming to
mm.
me, because they already are feeling
Yeah,
pretty down about it.
devastated by it. Hey,
And
totally.
I always say, but if you're feeling not great about sleep, your child isn't either. They might not have the language
Mhm.
to say, I'm
Yes.
tired, or I don't like bedtime, or even if they're 3 or 4 years old. But the
Mhm.
more positive we can be, or the more relaxed we can be about it, just like you said, your child who's sensory aware was very aware of what was happening when either parent
Yeah.
was
Could
doing
feel
bedtime, or
any
either
subtle
partner.
change.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So it's
Yeah.
as hard as it is, especially when you're kind of living it in those, and really in those first few months when you're exhausted. The more you can stay calm and positive and think, I'm going
Mhm.
to help my baby get to sleep and put her down, and maybe she's going to stay asleep when I put her down. Like it
Mhm.
it will help. It's hard, but it will help.
Yeah. It is so much about adjusting our expectations, which is why the
Yes,
education is so important because
right,
if we go in thinking this isn't working because of something I'm doing wrong, we get
right.
so agitated by that or feel shame or frustration or you know
Yeah,
um and if we understand actually what's happening right now is just a normal developmental phase, there's nothing broken here,
right,
but how are you going to actually lower the expectation or change the expectation so that
right,
you
right.
know what you're participating in rather than feeling like I'm failing at this because the result is not what I expected when I went in.
Right, and I
Right.
remember feeling with my older son who
Hmm.
did struggle with sleep at the beginning. I remember thinking, like, "What am I doing wrong?
Yeah,
I'm taking an
totally.
hour to feed him, an hour to help him get to sleep. He sleeps for an
Mhm.
hour, and then he's up again. Like,
Yeah.
what am I missing, and what is it that I'm doing wrong? Am I not feeding him right? Am I not?" And he needed more support to get to
Mm.
sleep. I thought I was gonna put down a baby, and he was going to fall asleep on his own, but that's not
Yeah.
how it is always. Babies sometimes need more
Yeah.
help than that. And I just didn't know
Mm,
that going in. And so
yeah.
you start to feel like, what did I do wrong? Which
So
is not
what
a
do you
great feeling.
from all the things that kind of flow into the work that you do, what would you say is kind of like the more common tips you end up giving? The things that
Yeah.
people surprisingly don't know about or are surprised by when you share that and they go, "Oh my goodness, that made such a big difference." Like, do you
Yeah.
have a kind of like the top 5 things that stand out to you that go, "Oh, those are our big ones."
Yeah, so I mean, I think probably you've heard me say some because I feel like I probably
Yeah.
say them a lot, but I think that one is being really patient with yourself and with your child because
Yeah.
it's not going to happen overnight. Even if your things are going well, it's not going to happen overnight. So be patient with yourself.
Mhm.
Every child is a little different. But if you can have confidence in your child, like if you can think in
Mm.
yourself, my kid can do this. I have to allow the space, give some tools, give some teaching. My child can do this. Your child will start to have confidence in themselves. Like you feeling
Yeah.
confident and also having confidence in your baby will goes a long way.
Yeah.
But knowing that, like we said at the beginning, that change is going to be frequent. So what happened last night at the beginning is not necessarily what's going to happen tonight, and that's
Yeah.
okay. Like
Yeah.
that is really okay. And um, yeah, so I think having being patient, staying positive and having confidence and knowing especially in those first 4 months, each night might be a little different and each day might be a little different, but that's okay. We
Yeah.
don't expect it to be exactly the same. I think that I often surprise people with the motion sleep, motionless sleep part, but that's
Yeah.
more of a like a tactic. And so so I think people often get surprised and don't necessarily want to hear that because a lot of people do rely on motion to help their baby sleep. And again, in those first 4 months, that's okay. Like you want to do anything safe that you can to help your baby sleep. But
Yeah.
after that, then make the change. But
Mm.
and then what I said also before is just to stay as positive as possible because it really makes a difference.
Mm.
And that's what I say with my family with toddlers also. And I know, we're talking about more at the beginning of life, babies, but with toddlers also, when you're exhausted and they wake you up in the middle of the night or you're up in the middle of the night and you are frustrated and annoyed, they see that. But if you're not, then they're not really
They
getting
also
it.
see that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I just think, particularly in the beginning, take the time to be patient and know that it's okay if it's not the same every single day.
Okay. I'm gonna pause. Okay. On the topic of tips, there was one thing
Yep.
that I was, as I was prepping for today's episode, I was thinking about back to how it affected, well, I mean, us as parents too, because we felt we were caring for a toddler who was impacted by our second child's troublesome
Yes.
sleep. And so we
Yes.
were aware of how loud her night terrors
Yeah.
were. So every hour
Uh-huh.
and a half,
Uh-huh.
our poor other one was being jolted
Yeah.
asleep, who would normally be a really solid sleeper.
Right.
And so we instituted all sorts of, man, you get creative. Hey, like we had weighted blankets, we moved her bedroom down the hall,
Yep.
we
Yep.
put white noise machines on, blackout
Mm-hmm.
curtains for our other one,
Mm-hmm.
and just a pillow, like a roll that we like put in the hallway against the buffer of the
Against the
bottom
door.
door. And like, how many more things can we add? But it felt so
Yeah.
important because we weren't just aware of how it was affecting the child who couldn't sleep well,
Right.
but it was like what the ripple effects were.
Yeah, yeah, and there
And
are. I mean, when I work with families who have multiple children, and depending, sometimes I'm working with the older child and not the
yeah.
baby, and sometimes I'm working with the baby and not the older child. But when I work with families and I'm helping them with their younger child, the first thing I have families do, no matter what, is actually sit down with the older child and just say, "We're helping your baby
Mm,
brother or sister or whoever be a get really good sleep like you get really good sleep. So
mm,
you might hear some crying, or you might hear some noises, or he might be awake more, but he's okay and he's safe. He's
mm.
just learning to be sleep like you. So that's not going to stop them from hearing, but we
Yeah.
just want to let them know from the beginning the baby is safe, the baby
To
is
lower,
loved,
yeah,
and
lower their
actually
distress.
practicing. Yep, they're
Okay.
practicing some tools to be a sleeper just like you
Mm.
sleep so well. So kind of put it in that way,
Oh, that's so
just so they
good.
hear it and they know. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that that may not prevent a nighttime wake up, but at least if it does, then it's okay. And again, with
Yeah.
night terrors, it's a very different. It can be a very different scenario,
Yeah.
and when if it's a baby that's waking to eat and they truly need to wake to eat, you're probably meeting their
Mhm.
needs pretty quickly, and not the
Yeah,
crying's not going
that's
on
right.
for
They'll
very long.
respond to that. Yeah.
But then there are other
Mhm.
times when we're working on self-soothing, and so a baby will wake and you're using other mechanisms, whether you're in the room with the baby or checking on the baby or doing something other than feeding, and that can cause prolonged noises or crying. And like you said, we add
Mhm.
white noise to the hallway, white noise to the
Yep.
room, maybe moving a child. If it's children who are already sharing a room or who are going to share a room, for children who are already sharing a room, like maybe I'm working with an older child and there's a younger child,
Mhm.
either one, I often will move the more flexible sleeper, meaning the sleeper
Okay.
who,
Who can
um,
adapt?
if you can
Yeah.
move to a parent room for a couple nights, knowing that you are going back to your own room in a few
Yes.
nights, so you are
Yeah.
this is a special treat or whatever,
Yep.
move the more flexible sleeper for a couple nights while you work on helping the other sleeper,
Good.
and then move them back into the room so that it can and I do that, like I said, flexible because it means that child is probably going to be okay with a few nights of a disrupted sleep
Yeah,
and then back
totally, and
into
then
their
go
bed.
back.
But it's hard, yeah. And the other
Mm,
piece, and again, this is not necessarily with night terrors, which can be longer
mhm,
episodes. Sometimes toddlers or older children don't wake when they hear their siblings
mhm.
like we do because we are so in tune to like hear our
Right,
child
we're
and be
ready
up
for
in a
them.
minute, like
Yeah,
ready to go.
yeah,
And for a sibling, it's like I don't need to deal with that. Like
yeah, I can tune it
I
out.
don't need to take care of that. Yeah.
Yeah,
So sometimes that's the case. It's
yeah,
not always the case, but I think a little prep
yeah.
work and just letting them know
Mm,
the baby's going to be okay. She's just learning, or your sister's okay. She's
yeah,
learning, or we're helping her. We're working on it with her.
cool.
Yeah.
Before we jumped on today's call, I was mentioning how a lot of people don't know sleep consultants exist, right? And
Yes.
and when we do learn that, it's because we're like madly Googling at 3 a.m. after 2 years of
Yes.
panic
Yep.
around our
Yep.
kids' sleep. So
Yep. Yep.
instead of wanting to wait to get this into the hands of people who are desperate, I want people to know how many supports exist before they even find themselves in the position of needing it. And
Yeah.
I think by and large, we go to our pediatrician. It's like that's how
Yes.
our medical
Yep.
systems are set up, is that's the
Yep.
gate. And if for
Yep.
anything and everything. And if you're lucky, because even some places you're going to be on a wait list for a pediatrician. So you go to your
Right.
GP.
Right.
And
Right.
there's
Right.
not specialized care often in those centers
Mm.
and those places or the time. And I think sleep stuff often gets dismissed. So if a parent is in distress about it and they're looking for actual coaching, a pediatrician is not necessarily going to coach you. They'll just say, don't worry about it. They're fine. The baby's fine,
Right.
healthy. They
Right.
check out.
Right.
There's nothing odd
Right.
here, but it doesn't
Right.
equip parents with anything
Right.
different. Right.
Right.
So,
Right. And
yeah.
that's, I mean, our pediatrician was wonderful when I had
Mm,
my babies, and I remember being in tears in her office at one point saying like
yeah.
I can't do this. And but it is true, like, they go through years and years of medical training, but the amount of like sleep specific for a child training that
Hmm.
they get is not, and then frankly they don't have time, like
Yeah.
it's not fair to them
That's right.
either. They have a schedule they have to keep to, and as much time as they want to spend with you, they sometimes aren't able to,
Yeah.
for insurance reasons or whatever it may be. So
Hmm.
it's tricky, and they can be really helpful. And of course, if it's something that you're concerned the baby's not gaining weight or not eating
Yeah.
enough or not, or digesting, then you're going to your pediatrician and finding out. And once those pieces are ruled out, that it's not a medical
Hmm.
situation,
Hmm.
then yes, sleep consultants are here and very, very helpful. And I remember, I mean, I can't tell you how many times people say to me when I tell them what I do, "That's so cool." Wait, what is it? What do you do? Like, wait, what? Like the first
Yeah.
reaction is
Yeah.
like,
What does
"Oh,
that
that's
mean?
awesome." Wait, who do you work with? So it's not, it's not a well-known
No, it's
piece.
not.
And as I said before, when people come to me, it's usually
Yeah.
because it's been, or they'll say, I
Last
can't believe I
straw.
didn't call you. Like, why didn't I call you a year ago? Like, why? And I love
Right.
what I do so much because
Mm.
when we're done working together, people will say, like, that was life changing.
Yeah.
Because as we all know, sleep is
Yeah,
it
it's
impacts
life.
all of us.
It
It's
keeps
our
us
life.
alive.
It impacts
Yeah.
your relationships, your marriage,
Yeah.
your health, your
Yeah.
well-being, and when you're not sleeping or when your child's not sleeping,
Yep.
it is and I also think that families think like, "Oh, this is just the way it's gonna be." Like, I
Yeah.
just have a kid who's not
There's
gonna be a
nothing I can do about
sleeper.
it.
Nothing I
Mhm.
can do. She's really stubborn. This baby's just not gonna and the thing is, if there's not a medical reason, like if there's not something that's preventing sleep, then we can work together and make
Mm.
changes. So I think doulas are of course wonderful to support
Yeah.
with moms and parents and and pediatricians are wonderful also, but reaching out for to help with a sleep consultant, it's if you need it is really it makes a big difference. It's
Yeah.
somebody who will when I work with families, I get to know them and figure out what it is that they need, and
Mm.
then we make a plan for them.
Yeah.
So there's lots of
Mm.
moms, parents groups out there. You can put a question on there. You'll get 100 responses
Yep.
back of what to do and not to do.
Mhm.
But sometimes it's not right for you or what
Mhm.
like you just need to know what you should do it with
Absolutely.
your child. And so it's hard to pick through all that information.
I often ask parents to almost just honor their own needs in that sense. I think we dumb it down or minimize it and we think, "Oh, it's not that it can't be that bad. I'm not going to get one-on-one support for something that I can just Google or I can just talk to a
Right.
friend about." Or and I think we land in a real place of disappointment and disservice to ourselves and our kids because we've shamed ourselves kind of into believing we don't
For
deserve that
sure.
level of
For
care,
sure.
and we all suffer as a result of it
Yep.
unnecessarily, and you
Yeah.
could spend, I think about this even just as a benign example, but I put my kids in swimming lessons and there were like 8 kids in the class, and I calculated one day how much individual attention they got in that class, and it was 4 minutes. I'm like, I'm paying for a half an
Right.
hour lesson,
Right.
and yes, it's cheaper than the one-on-one, but the
Right.
one-on-one is actually turns out to be cheaper because they get that
Right.
person for the
Right.
whole 30
Right.
minutes and it actually costs
Right.
less if you add
Right.
that up.
Right. Right.
Like, just
And
go
right.
quality.
It is true. And
Yeah.
when I with my older son when he was 2,
Yeah.
we used a sleep consultant.
Yeah.
I was at a loss. I didn't know what else to do, and I was a teacher at the time, and I remember thinking like I can't help my kids sleep. Like, what is wrong with me? What? Oh,
Mm.
and then I just got to a point where I was like, you know what? I get help for other things. Like, there are other things.
Yeah.
I go to the
I go to a
pediatrician if my
dentist.
child is sick. So I go, right. So
Right.
why
Yeah.
there are people out there. And my
Yeah.
husband knew somebody who knew a sleep consultant, and we reached out. And then I was almost like, do I tell people I did this? Do I need to be
Right?
embarrassed that I
Yes,
did
we
this?
ask
It's
those
like I
questions.
don't want to tell anybody that I needed
Mm.
help. Like, that is crazy.
Yeah.
You should it's okay to ask for help. It makes
Mm.
sense if you need help. Every child is not going to be the easiest sleeper.
Nope.
They're not necessarily wired like that, and it's okay to ask for
Yeah.
help.
Yeah.
It's really important actually to ask for help.
Mm.
So, yeah.
I appreciate you saying that. Every episode we try and normalize anything that has to do with our health and our mental well-being.
Yep.
And I think so much of what stops us from getting the resources that we need is ourselves. We put our own blocks in. And
Mhm.
I say that knowing the bigger context is the stigma. We've learned to believe that we're going to look like we're less than or weak or unable if
Right.
we reach out for these things, and that's absolutely not the case. So if we can embolden parents to say, I'm not buying that narrative, I'm not going to
Right.
I'm just going to get the help and then help other
Yep.
people, because once we're in it, more oftentimes than not, we go, why didn't I do this sooner? We have
Yeah.
that reaction. I have that in the
Yep.
counseling office all the time. Like, why
Yeah.
did I
Yeah.
wait until I
Yes.
felt like I couldn't do life anymore? I'm
Right.
like, right, because we're conditioned to believe that that's what counseling is, that it isn't
Right.
preventative, that it isn't early
Right.
intervention, that it isn't coaching and life planning, that,
Right. Right.
and then we find
And
ourselves
and
there.
yeah, for parenting too, we're just supposed to believe that we're supposed
Yeah.
to like know all the
Yeah.
answers when we have kids. But how would you know? Like, how do you know that your child at 2? Yeah, at 2 there might be some sleep disruption
Yeah.
just because they turn 2 and there's developmental
Yep.
changes
Yeah.
happening. Like, it's okay.
Yeah.
But asking for help is really um, is so important for families, and to
Mm.
not feel like they failed. It's not,
Yeah.
you didn't fail because
No.
your child's not sleeping. You just needed some help.
Yeah.
Um, so
Lovely.
yeah,
I
yeah,
also love it when parents find out when they reach out for help how much they're doing right. They're
yeah.
convinced that well, I'm reaching out for the things that are problematic, and then you get on the
Right,
line with a professional who are like, "Wow,
right.
good job. You're doing so many of
Right.
the
I'm
things
like, "Wow, the
already."
room is great, the environment's
Yeah.
awesome, you're already
Look
doing all
what
these
you
great
thought
things,"
of.
and they're like, "Okay, okay." Like, yeah,
Phew,
mhm.
right? Load off.
Uh-huh. Yep, yep.
Thank you for your time
Yeah.
today. I'm
Oh,
going to include your information in the show notes for people who would like to learn more about your practice and accessing services and resources. I'm going to direct them to you. So thank you, thank you,
thank
thank you.
you. Thank you for having me. This was great. It was such a fun conversation, and it's just I'm so happy to be part of a series that's really supportive of families and parents. So, thank you.
Excellent. Have a great
Yeah.
week.
Thanks, you too. Bye.